So when you look at Jelly Bean Working, what is it all about? And I'm delighted to say that with Mirvac, we're launching a new report called Jelly Bean Working. And it's available if you drop a card into the Mirvac stand at the event. Can we get the slides moving? There we go. So my job is to look at those three circles and interpret for you the impact of, I think, some of Harold's fantastic visions and its logical translation into the physical environment. And it's that overlap which I think is really interesting between the green, the technology, and the red people, the green and the blue buildings. It's where those overlaps happen, where you get the extreme innovation and the potential for something very new. And I think when you look at the future of work, it's now very different. It's about leaving behind some of the old kind of paradigms, that work is about getting back to this thing called a desk, this piece of wood, that work is about something very different. And we need to move that forwards. It's not advancing. Moving forwards is not happening with the technology. There we go. Because you see from the classic films about the future of the workplace, it's not a great environment that we're creating for people today in their place of work. And I think what we have to do is be brave and challenge the idea that space is something very different for the future. So when you look at the kind of traditional issues around space and space standards, we end up with this. We end up with the idea that people are just squeezed into fewer and fewer square feet or square meters, really kind of constricting the footprint. And that, to me, is a massive change. Perfect, thank you. And when you look at this evolution, this kind of trajectory we've kind of been on, our challenge in this kind of audience is to say, well, what is next? Where do we head? What is the next logical evolution for kind of corporate man who today is hunched over a PC? And of course, that's the reality. In Tati's fantastic film called Playtime, as Harold said, we've come from this Taylorist world where most people watch and supervise by looking at the backs of people's heads and putting them into boxes. And the American cube farm still lives strong in many, many organizations. But we're now no longer in this world of predictable hierarchies. We are living in a world of networks. And this is a very interesting, huge growth market in North America now known as relationship science, or RELSI. And RELSI is now mapping who knows who's interacting with who inside the corporate workplace. So when you look at RELSI and you kind of step back, you can say, well, how should we accommodate buildings? Should it be on that kind of historic organizational chart, as Harold showed, the kind of command and control, which is very easy because 2 or 3 departments with different head counts equates to so many square feet, fits a floor of a building. It's nice and easy to accommodate the organizational chart and stack a building to reflect it. This is much harder, but this is an interesting map of who's emailing who inside a very large organization. And if you look at what the findings are, that group of red dots are people with a high connection flow of emails, instant messages, and so on, around a 100,000 person organization globally. So you could say, well, why don't we accommodate those people together? Why don't we just sit those people who are doing the real work in a real cluster into a space in a building, physically and virtually, and let them work together for the weeks or months of that project? And Andy Boyd, who's Global Head of Knowledge Management within Shell, said that they're trying to remove email overload in this large organization, and they've changed how you ask questions to the global Shell community by saying, let's post on a web discussion forum. What he found was fascinating. When you post a question on a web discussion forum to 100,000 people, half the respondents were people that you didn't know within the organization. Of all the best answers back, of course, the best ones came from those you didn't know. So he said to me, as a workplace person, surely you're inviting the wrong people to meetings, because the people with the answers aren't there. So how do we get that right in any knowledge-based business for the future? Now, everyone that we talk to is thinking about physical space and social networks, how you map what's going on, how you collide these. Our Dutch friends are always first and pioneering. KLM now say you can choose your seat in the future, not just based on window or aisle, but based on who you know on LinkedIn or Facebook. Good or bad, huh? You might say, I'd like to know this person. We might even see Tinder flights going forwards, mightn't we? That's a brave new market we reckon could open up. But when you look at the buildings, and I've kind of hacked Macquarie's fantastic building in London, where they ripped out, nibbled out, as they say, but ripped out many floors to create this incredible Escher-like staircase. Now, why would they do that? It's about buildings being physical social networks. Imagine what happens next when the building knows who's in, who your connections are, and your state. So you can see on the image, you have jelly beans appearing from LinkedIn, for example, and it might say, hey, I've come to London for this meeting, but would you believe somebody's come in from Auckland to a different meeting in the same building on the same day? So buildings will begin to engineer the bumps or engineer serendipity because they'll know who's in, what people's knowledge base is, their contact base, their networks, what they're doing, and they will engineer or suggest the encounters. And this follows a lot of management theory. Stephen Johnson has a great book which I recommend called Where Good Ideas Come From. In it he says, innovation springs out of the adjacent possible. The most inventive places are hives of activity. Now, you don't get that if people are distributing themselves and working virtually. And that's where Marissa Mayer and others have said we want people back in the workplace. Buildings are now, as Harold said, places for energy, pulse, interaction, and vibrancy. And I think it fits and overlays really well with what else is happening. The Economist a year ago had this incredible front cover, which I think now predicts what I would call a perfect storm that is about to hit the workplace and physical environments. And the storm has three key ingredients. It has the cloud, which is essential, new connectivity, new devices. And the cloud is just taking away the entire paradigm that the building houses technology, software, and data. And it has done so for so long, it's very difficult to mind shift as to what that would mean. But can you imagine buildings where there is nothing inside it? There are no servers, no software programs, and no data at all in an office or other building typology. So what you do is you connect to it from somewhere else. And when you see what people are carrying in their pockets, it has dramatically changed just in the last few years. That's the shot, the same shot of St. Peter's Square in Rome for the inauguration of the Pope. Look at the difference in what people are using themselves in an 8-year time gap. So we're seeing this incredible adoption of technology, and there's much more to come in the labs. Very exciting. And the front cover of The Economist this week is that. Planet of the phones. What happens when 80% of the population carries a smartphone? It's not just about accessing Twitter, it's about the phone being a sensor, being a camera, knowing where you are, knowing about your habits, whether it's work, health, exercise, shopping, and so on. Where do we go when we have this in our pocket, linked to the cloud in real time? It's very similar to lots of other things. The Google car, the driverless car, which is a fantastic technology, is really pushing the boundaries of where automation will go. The car sees what's on that bottom dashboard, and it has incredible sensors and technology built into it. We think the same thing will come into the workplace. People will start using these sensors inside buildings. Today, it's not great. You end up a little bit clunky. But you've all seen, of course, the images of where we're heading with wearables tomorrow. And there's a forecast market now of 300 million wearable devices in the next 2-3 years. And when you unbundle this kind of smart device, what's inside it is really staggering. There are 3 miniaturized components, which I love: the accelerometer, the barometer, and the gyrometer. And today you can count your steps. Tomorrow it's much more exciting because the building itself will react to you in real time. It'll know who you are, where you're going, what you're there to do, who you're there to see, and can actually change your experience from wayfinding all the way through to the kind of meet and greet in reception, which can now be personalized. And therefore buildings will have to be revolutionized. This cannot be retrofitted into your average office building. Buildings will need absolute intelligent infrastructure, IP backbones with everything hanging off it to allow this incredible new vision of the Internet of Things with sensor networks which will be in the billions to connect and deliver this big vision of the future. The device makers are leaping ahead though. They're not going to wait for buildings to catch up. The iPhone 6 has technology like near-field communication built into it. So what does that mean? Well, wearables will just be huge. When Apple launches the watch in a few weeks' time, it will trigger an immense market in wearable technology, Already in transport systems, you can now pay with a bracelet, which is on trial, as you can see, and the iPhone has secure payments. So you can now use your iPhone with your fingerprint recognition to make payments, which will be universal within 2 or 3 years, replacing credit cards and a whole range of things, we believe. But why not use that for building access? If you can use it securely to buy something in a retail store, you can, of course, get into your building by touching your phone with an NFC reader. Cashless vending, follow-me printing, opening lockers, you name it, can all now become done from a smartphone in a building for the future. We're also going to see the smartphone changing your experience in the workplace. This is one of many people developing apps globally. This is a Nordic company called Flowscape, and they're triangulating your position inside the office down to 2 inches using your mobile phone and its wireless signal. They know where you're standing, they know who you are, they know your kind of presence, your jelly bean, because they can see what you're doing and look at your calendar. They can interrogate all your colleagues, they can look at resources, you can book space, and you get a dashboard of the effectiveness of both your users and your organization and your building. So Flowscape and others are pushing the boundaries, and here in Singapore, they've gone one stage further. They're identifying people down to a few centimeters on the floor plate. They superimpose their photograph or their picture from internal networks and directories, and then they superimpose what they're doing in Yammer or Twitter or elsewhere. So now what you're seeing is colleagues are being connected in an office based on their Yammer or their Twitter feeds. So if I'm in the same building as David, we might be on Twitter together doing something, and it would say, hey, you're both tweeting about the same subject, you're in the same building at the same time, I'll just connect you and say you guys should have a conversation. So this is kind of very, very close, and you'll hear from Jeremy later on this afternoon from Sociometric Solutions, who've got the most incredible technology that's come out of MIT in Boston. We're seeing big organizations say it's not just about tracking people or efficiency, it's about the quantified self. So here Google are saying, look, we can now quantify Googlers and their performance. We can say how many uninterrupted hours of coding have they done, how many emails have they had to tackle after 9 o'clock at night, how many people have they talked to in the last few days. So the quantified self will be very big, very quickly, which we think will lead to the quantified workplace, which will be expected. And this is being borrowed by retailers. People are grabbing this technology and data in retail, of course, and they're the leaders. You can now be tracked as you come into a retail store. You can be encouraged to check in via Facebook. You can then be sent personalized offers, vouchers based on your own personal preference and retail background. Why not do this in reception? You know, a future reception experience will be very different. You'll walk in, your concierge or your receptionist will screen pop as you walk in through the doors. It'll give you their photograph of your guest, their entire profile and history based on a link to Salesforce, and you can meet them and greet them by name. And that person will link to you as a business, potentially through iBeacon, a brand new technology from Apple and others using something called Bluetooth Low Energy. And that gives you near-range experiences. Started in retail, we think very quickly it'll come into workplace. You'll overlay that with security cameras. Facial recognition will be good, as you heard from Harold, within about 2 or 3 years. You will know who's coming in based on their device, overlaid with facial recognition, pretty much 100% accuracy as to who's coming to your building, and links to their profiles and so on. So this makes me think that this idea of a desk phone is now dead. Would you agree? Can we wave goodbye to a lump of plastic on a desk that kind of demarcated this little thing and you kind of logged in or you had it allocated? Of course, the future is software. You know, we're heading headlong, as you heard from Harold, into a vision of contextualized software. The software changes itself based on who you are, what you're doing, what your calendar says, your priorities, and so on. And it will get better and better. Harold didn't show Word co-authoring, the ability now to work on the same live digital document with others at the same time. So here you can see on the right-hand side, Terry and David are working on different paragraphs simultaneously. On the left-hand side, you've got Sean and Jonathan, but Sean's jelly bean has gone red. And that's Sean telling you, look, don't call me or instant message me. I'm in flow. Leave me alone. Do not disturb. Whereas if your jelly bean is green, you're working, but you can interact as well. So digital etiquette is now coming from this idea of the jelly bean. The jelly bean will be kind of all permeable. You know, it'll happen in Link and Skype for Business, but as Harold mentioned, Delve and Office Graph will begin to tell you who's working on what, if they're available. It will conjure this up for you itself. It'll curate your experiences. And therefore, we'll see a whole range of new ideas. We think we'll leave behind just this idea of a couple of screens and a laptop and instead go to fully immersive, curved screens, what we do at work, with a range of digital experiences, digital flow with jelly beans coming from different contextualized experiences. And this will get better and better. The idea that you'll see somebody at the end of a table, we think is now very close in terms of the quality of interaction physically and virtually. And as Harold mentioned, in their Envisioning Centre, they've got incredible ideas, and I recommend you go to Redmond, phenomenal ideas as to how you can multitask with digital surfaces and blackboards of the future. So what we're finding is this massive transformation, and we think the jelly bean will also be physical. The idea that you can have physical symbols of people who need to be left alone. So here is a jelly bean totem pole that changes colour on a desk or a screen based on your activity. It can sense you need to be left alone and go into a state of flow. It goes red saying do not disturb. And you'll get physical space doing the same thing. So these kind of coloured icons and symbols are everywhere. And they will be even more so, we think, in the future. But they're not that new. So a quick video for you of the early ideas of wireless and jelly bean working.
This man is deaf. Unlike you or I, he cannot hear the phone ringing even though it's only 18 inches away from him.
That is until now, because a team of research students at Guy's Hospital have invented this device, the audio-visual sonic communication system with this, a microprocessor base. It enables a flashbulb suspended here to be connected to an aerial receiver here whenever the phone where the transmitter is housed begins to ring. So now, when this discreet accessory is worn, even a deaf person knows when the phone is ringing.
The jelly bean will be everywhere, whether we kind of use it in that way or something different. And it keeps coming. So Samsung launched 2 days ago their new phone, the S6, with a curved screen for the first time. One of their big visions is to enable the jelly bean. The phone has 5 colors, and it will flash a different color based on who's trying to connect with you. Their vision is that it will present that color on your desk surface, here green, for somebody else red, for somebody else blue, and so on. So the jelly bean as a color indicator is now coming headlong from a range of directions. Samsung have launched another idea which I think is quite interesting. Harold thinks it's a bit goofy, and we can debate this. Rather than a screen, you just slot your phone into a virtual reality headset and use your phone as the screen for the future. But there's much more coming. So wireless power is now with us. There are 2 rival consortiums, and we're seeing this. This is the new Samsung wireless power, and IKEA yesterday launched the first wireless power in furniture. So this is going headlong. You know, clients will expect to come into your buildings, drop a device onto a surface and recharge it. If IKEA can do it, surely this industry can get ahead as well. So the question you've got is, what color is your jelly bean? You know, where is this going? And I think what we're finding is that the workplace will evolve very, very quickly. Just a couple of examples of extreme innovation. On Friday, Google announced their new plans for Mountain View, this incredible campus covered with a glass film or cover designed by Thomas Heatherwick. And as David said, he wants a flexible workplace within a huge glass canopy. And we're seeing this kind of hacking space is a big theme, we think, in Silicon Valley. This is Apple's advertising agency, Chart Day in Los Angeles. They've taken an old warehouse and made it into one of the most exciting workplaces. No daylight, no traditional footprints, just a phenomenal building that's a city for a business. We're seeing massive innovation from kind of, you know, the kind of work and play balance to using billboards inside a workplace, the narrative of what they're there to do. The most exciting new building in London, this is called Second Home, is a hacked old carpet warehouse that was seen as a redundant building. It's now an Ottolenghi restaurant. It's the home for many of the big tech startups around Silicon Roundabout, including Foursquare and others. Even property companies put their incubation space inside this environment. Another great example is this. This is a financial business. Look how they worked before. Very traditional, files, desks, paper. They got the new world of work. They threw the rule book away, and they built themselves a kind of a home for their people, which looks like this. It's radically different. It looks more like a kind of retail environment. The technology is almost invisible. It's more like a New York loft-style environment for a financial business, where you bring your technology to these fantastic surfaces, and if you want to use a screen, you go somewhere else and dock it. But by and large, you've got these amazing abilities. And what they achieved in doing this, in what they call imposed density, was to free up space they couldn't have before for either libraries and focused areas, but this is the killer for them, origination rooms, agile scrum environments, where they're buying businesses and making those processes tangible. And that's made a huge impact on their business. And we're seeing this everywhere. These are agile scrum physical spaces in Stanford University, and we're seeing a lot more user adaptable space as the future. On the other extreme, we're seeing people like here, Barbarian in New York, saying, look, what's a workplace? We just want one surface for everyone at work. And therefore, we're seeing massive innovation around the world. So the future of work is really fascinating. Activity-based working started with the article in the middle, a long, long time ago by Bob Lucetti, and a few weeks ago, the HBR cover said, why we hate our offices. 70% plus workers in North America are disengaged. So our view is a very different vision, activity-based clustering, based around people, how you identify their communities and clusters, celebrating difference as opposed to bringing people into a kind of homogeneous environment, and getting the metrics and the data from these kind of sources that persuades a board or partnership that you can do things differently. So I'm delighted that we're launching a new report called Jelly Bean Working. All of these ideas is within this report, and drop a card into the Mervac stand. I want to take the last minute, a little bit over time, but I want to just show you a poem we've commissioned on Jelly Bean Working by a great poet called Matt Harvey. So I'm going to leave you with this poem.
What fun we shall have. We shall all have such fun in our jelly bean world, and we'll get so much done. Said Manager 1 to Manager 2, what is a jelly bean? What does it do? Well, it's a blob that can blink. It's a project detector. It's a link that can wink. It's a colleague connector. A telltale twinkling from illumined informants, an up-to-date inkling reporting performance. And the shade that's displayed says what each of them do. There's a hint in the tint, there's a clue in the hue. That's quite good. It's a peer pressure point, a magic marker, two-way keyhole, nosy Parker. And here's the bit that I've only just filled in. Jelly bean working means low-balanced building. Not so good. It's a digital diamond, a pearl of low price. It's a blob that's as good as a wink. It's concise. It's an X marks the spot. It's a word in your ear about who's doing what, who's far and who's near. But Manager 1 has a smidgen of doubt. Your jelly bean team seem quite widely spread out. Flexible practice is all very well, but the practical fact is it's your job to tell worker from shirker and striver from skiver, early adopter from tardy arriver. To keep tabs on your team and your team on their toes, you must herd them in buildings and line them in rows. There must be a minimum level of order. Why can't your jelly beans be more like Mordor? One bean to rule them all, one bean to find them, one bean to bring them all, and in the cloud to bind them. No, jelly bean working's not what you suppose. They are led by example and not by the nose. That's your point, I think. In bed, shed or barroom, hub, bistro or brasserie, the jelly bean team are free range, not battery. The bean team don't need to be chivied and chased. Their jelly bean world is activity-based, so the doing gets done. and its doing is seen by means of the beautiful mutable bean, the bean with the buzz that can bypass the miles, that can pollinate plans and cross-fertilise files. The chameleon bean whose changes reveal who's playing for keeps and who's keeping it real. And that's why we dance to a jelly bean tune and work by the light of a jelly bean moon. That's the jelly bean poem. Well done, Ian. Thank you.
So there you go, jelly bean working. Thank you very much.